Church here in downtown Washington. I have this all down chronicling the last 3 years, so you may see yourself up on those slides, and if you do, well, thanks for giving us permission to put you up on there. So over the next few minutes, there will be some photos of the last 3 years up there, and it's all going to be a testimony to the crazy journey we've been on since 2018. As you already know, King's Church has never been big on sensationalism or fanfare, so we don't have balloons or a dancing Moses this morning, but we really are grateful this morning for 3 years as a church. So 3 years ago, on February 2018, Wesley, Abby, Bradley, Letty, Ben, Courtney, Lee, Rhonda, Meg, Al, Margaret, and a few others covenanted together to start King's Church at a hotel near Capitol Hill. It's in Noma, the Marriott, was that right? The Hotel Marriott. The odds were not in our favor, though 4,000 churches are planted every year in the United States. DC, LA, and Manhattan are graveyards for church plants, meaning it's almost impossible to start faithful churches in those cities. Additionally, we had a crazy small budget as a church. Our budget was a shoestring budget, and virtually every other church plant in a city like Manhattan, DC, or LA was budgeting around 5 to 10 times the little shoestring budget that we had as a church. On top of that, we had a very small core team. Typical of bigger cities is a larger core team. We were under 15 people, and only about half of those lived in Washington, D.C. Yet, here we are. By God's grace, we did it anyways. We believed, we saw the need, we accepted the challenge, and we accepted the risks. That first year was really bumpy. We met at that same hotel for about 4 more months and saw a net growth of about 5 people over 4 months. We met some of the most amazing people and some of the most challenging people during those months. In the early parts of 18, we moved to the New York Presbyterian Church, or also known as Abraham Lincoln's Church, in downtown Washington, D.C. Of the 100 places plus that we called, this was the only place we could afford and where we could meet at. Those months were very bumpy too, with core team and initial scaffolding members, meaning people there who were temporary to help kind of support the church, rolled off and returned to their churches. As the summer hit, we started figuring things out. After a few months at New York Presbyterian Church, we finally got a break and scored a deal with our friends over at the International Spy Museum. For the next 5 months or so, we began to see a lot more guests, new members, and earned the nickname Spy Church among many here in Washington. At that point, our church was really small, but it was really tight. We had about 35 constant people, but everybody was like a family. Many of us remember the welcome addition of the Bradshaws, who aren't here today, the Browns, who are back in North Carolina, Laura up on the Keys, Jordan, McKenna, Hannah, Trevor, Jack, and the Washington Fellowship. Growth was still difficult as our budget was low, our location was still obscure, our ministry model was intentionally non-sensational but rigorous about the truth and authentic community. As that first year closed out, I remember striking up a conversation with an Uber driver who God would later use to find this building for us and whose family was here for a time. In early 2019, we moved into this building. It's a charter school governed and directed in Arizona, so it makes it a unique building right here in the heart of the city with a reasonable weekly rent as well as an awesome staff, meaning this is an amazing gift to us. For the next year, we started really becoming a church. We finally welcomed a musical leader and friend, Nathan Pierre, who was recently engaged. We grew, in Hawaii. We grew to about 70 people who were serious about walking with Christ, with each other, and living in the reality that faith is integrated with all of life, meaning church is not just an event, but it's a people we do life with and belong to, and they belong to us in a godly kind of way. That year was one of the best of many of our lives, and both Wesley and I became full-time that year. Our small groups grew. People started really growing in their faith. We saw people trusting in Christ for the first time. It was a really exciting year. 2020 hits, and like all of you, we were really excited for the amazing year ahead. For the first 2 months, we saw explosive growth. Our services were hitting about 90 to 115 in the early months of January and February. We maintained the tightness of community, intentional friendships, focused on truth, grace, and love. And I think we managed the growth really well. During that entire stretch of 14 months, we saw one member leave and virtually every single attender become a member and commit with us. That's cultish level retention rates in a church. March hits and the pandemic rages. Those first initial months, like all of you, were very confusing and there was much shock. I remember the idea of having to be an online pastor with Wesley to be the single most frustrating thought I could imagine. The thought of being the church on the internet was an absolute deal breaker for me, as well as Wesley, and all we could think about during those first initial months was how the heck do we stay connected with our church, our people? How do we keep caring about people, and how do we do this safely? During that time, we saw pastors here in the city as well as around the country make awful decisions. We saw pastors leave their congregations and still to this day have no personal contact with their congregants. Some of those went on long-term vacations to Aruba and simply just abandoned their congregation. At that moment, we said, we're going to really lean into this. We're going to really lean into caring for people and caring about our city. And we're going to press on through the anxiety and the uncertainty of the future ahead of us. We made a decision to lean into this. And the minute we could get back to meeting as a church, we opened. We reopened safely with 10. And, yep, golf, there you go. We reopened safely with 10 people in June and 10 the following week. And ever since, less one day because of the inauguration, we've been open, working hard to be the church with you all here in Washington, D.C. 2021 hits, and as of today, our church has grown exponentially. We have around 140 people involved in some way, with an average about 85 people, including kids, probably a little bit more this morning, in our services. We're launching new small groups with several leaders in the wings. Of the 9 churches that started in a typical way in Washington, D.C. since 2015, that is sent out from a sending church with a typical budget, not a multi-million-dollar budget. One of those churches never got off the ground. One's about to close. 5 of those failed, and there's only 2 that remains, us and a church, a sister church in DuPont Circle. Knowing the inner workings of all this over the last 3 years, this is a miracle. It may not look like it, but this little church has made a big difference, from national matters to policy to family issues to mental health to people experiencing homelessness. There's been amazing things that God has accomplished through us, his church. And I just want to say before I pray, aside from Jesus Christ, there's been a common denominator in Wesley and I from day one. Aside from faith in Christ, it's a single trait that was the green light in my mind to doing this with him. Our backgrounds, our experiences, and our faith all give it to us, and that's called grit. Grit is perseverance. It's a determination to never quit, and that's what I've seen in Wesley, the kind of friendship that I've experienced with both him and Abby since we've started. And so long as the Lord has us all here, so I want to reassure you all that we'll never quit. We'll never give up on you. Even if we whittle down to 5, we'll keep going. At the end of the day, as the quote goes, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. I'm grateful that we've worked, all of us, so hard on this. There's no scandals, there's no cowardice, there's no caving. There's just simplicity, love, truth, and grace. With that said, we are grateful for all of you who've made this possible over the last 3 years. Bradley, Letty, especially shout out to you guys, our small group leaders, everybody who serves. Thank you. We are excited for the days to come and all that God will do through this congregation.